Welcome back. Today we're going to be sharpening lawnmower blades using an angle grinder. Now, if all you want is the mile-high view, today we're going to remove the old blade, sharpen it, clean up the lawnmower, and then put the blade back on. As for how we're going to do that, the first thing is flipping the mower back so you can access the underside. Mowers are designed to be flipped back like this if you're servicing them. Flipping it any other way might spill out fuel or oil. Now, this mower in particular doesn't sit all the way on its backside, some do, so I'm using two separate blocks to hold it up here, and these can also be used to hold the blade stable. This especially helps when you're going to take the blade off because it's going to prevent the blade from spinning when you're undoing the nut in the center. Fortunately for me, I didn't have to hold the blade stable because I'm using an impact and it spins so quickly on its own. But once that nut and washer come off, the blade should just pop right out and you should be ready to work on it.
So here is our lawnmower blade now that is detached. You can see this leading edge here. That is our cutting edge. And on the other side, it's here. So if you get these little like tail marks here, that is your trailing edge. So it spins away from that. This front edge is what is going to be cutting the grass. So you can see this is almost like comically dull. That's not even really an edge anymore. That's more of just like a baseball bat, a blunt force object. I got this lawnmower secondhand and I was told it was fine and it was not cutting grass the best. So we have to sharpen this desperately. Now what we're doing is we're just trying to follow this factory angle. You see this like silver part here along the edge where it kind of tapers in. We're going to follow that angle. You can use a hand file. We're going to be using an angle grinder here. You could also use a bench grinder. I do not have a bench grinder or else I would be using that. And we're just taking away this material until we get to the point that it comes back to a tip. We might have to hit a little bit on the other side, but for the most part, we're just going to hit this top side right here. Now you want to take the same amount of material off of both sides of the blade. That way when you hold it in the middle, it is still relatively balanced. I'll give you an example real quick. They sell balancers, but you can use a screwdriver, you can use a nail. Basically there's 100 ways to do this. Anything that you can just balance the blade on. That's all you're really looking for. And as you can see right now, this side is already a little bit lower than the other side, so it's not even perfectly balanced to begin with. Let's get more of a straight on look here. You can visually see how this side is lower than the other side here. So that would mean that this side is heavier. You have to take more material off of this side. So already starting off, we're not balanced, but we know this side we're gonna have to do more passes than that side to get everything level while we're sharpening it off. So that's why I check it before I start sharpening.
Next, I'm getting everything ready for the sharpening, and the first thing we're doing is securing the blade into the bench vise. Now, I'm using an angle grinder with a grinding wheel. You can also use a flap disc on an angle grinder, but even if you're using a hand file or if you're using a bench grinder, you just want the blade to be securely held when you're working on it so that you can sharpen from one edge of the blade down to the other edge of the blade using a consistent angle along the entire length. Now, I made a couple quick test passes to get my angle quite right, and let's go into some detail about what you're looking for to get the right angle.
Now the first few passes, you're just trying to get your angle right and make sure you have the right approach. So you can see here, this is like the first one I did, really shiny towards the edge, and then this entire underside here is still that dull gray of the old finish. That meant I was too far up, so I had to come back. And then I went too far back when I was trying to straighten out that angle, and you can see here I only caught the bottom half. So I did the same thing where I over-angled it away, and then right here I got it just about right. So what you're also seeing is this is not a perfectly flat surface. So this has probably been sharpened before in the past. We're not gonna get it perfect because of that, and there's also a couple kinks in here, and I don't know if that's a factory blade option. It's pretty symmetric on both sides, so I'm assuming that's by design, but I don't know that for a fact. So that's also gonna make this a lot more challenging to follow the curve. As you do this, it's gonna shoot sparks, so wear your safety equipment, and this will get hot. I'm touching it quickly with gloves because I didn't really do that much work on it yet, but the more grinding you do, the hotter that this is gonna get. Ignore the rest of the stuff in my bench. I got a couple other projects going on in the background, but I wanna get a better angle on this. So I'm gonna move the camera so you guys can see as I try to match this angle and go across.
Now, it doesn't matter whether you're using the angle grinder like I am, or if you're using a hand file or a bench grinder, the real key to success is grinding at the same exact angle from one pass to the next as you're working your way down the blade. And while it's ideal to use this same angle that the factory already has etched into the edge of the blade, and that probably makes it easiest, it's not always necessary to do that if your setup is a little bit differently angled, or if maybe you're just not as consistent as the factory edge is. As long as you're consistent with yourself on these passes, you will get a good finished product. A couple tricks that I have to do this are to lock your arms against your torso or against some sort of a solid object. That way they're well supported as you trace along. Obviously keep a firm firm grip. I've got a secondary handle for my left hand here on this angle grinder. And finally, try to keep your speed consistent as you pass from one edge of the blade down to the other. There's a few points in this video where I slowed down a little bit too much, and because this blade isn't perfectly straight and has those weird curves in it, you can see the angle grinder bite in a little bit. Then I have to do a bunch of localized passes to work those areas out. Had I been more consistent with my speed, that probably would not have occurred. Now keep in mind that only this front edge is going to be doing the cutting, so don't worry too much about the side. That little corner there, you might need to sharpen a little bit, but that doesn't need to do the bulk of the work here. And as I said before, I'm only doing a few passes along this backside. We're really not removing a lot of material here. It's really to refine the edge from a second angle to give it a little bit more of a point. And now that we've made some good progress on sharpening it, let's give this a check and see where we're at.
Now it's pretty good at this point. It's not 100% perfect. You lightly graze with your finger, you can feel that it's a lot sharper. Now looking down this blade, you can see it's a lot more of a point, so it's actually reasonably sharp. It's not like razor sharp. Some people like theirs absolutely razor sharp, but I mean, you're cutting grass. It's not like precision aircraft stuff here. If you're really looking for a perfect edge, you probably want a more adept setup than this. This is very technique based. Even a bench grinder makes it a lot easier to do this with a more consistent angle. And again, a bench grinder is what I personally prefer. I just don't have one available. It's not worth me running out to get one just for this one project today. Now we're going to check the balance. All right, looking here, this bench is level, this vise is level, this side here is sagging down. So we know this side is heavier, that's why it's getting pulled down. We've got to do a few more passes over here to take more material off. Then it should be ready to reinstall.
I really wish there was some sort of secret method and technique I could share here, but it really came down to guess and check for how much material to remove. Obviously, the heavier that one side is, the more material you're going to have to remove from that side. But as for if it's 1 versus 12 passes, it's really going to depend on how aggressive your grinding setup is, as well as how hard you are pressing into it. There's so many variables here that there's just no one standard that I can tell you for how many passes it'll take. The one thing my engineering background can tell you is that it's all about the center of gravity, so removing weight farther out towards the edges will be more effective than removing weight closer to the center line.
All right, it's not quite perfect. We're gonna go a little more aggressive on this. Getting really close here, but again, this side we want a little bit higher. This is probably good enough for most homeowners, to be honest. And this is about where we were when we started this video, so this is about how the equipment was when we were already operating it. So it's not like it's going to imminently explode if it's a little bit off balance. It's more that there's like a bearing that goes here in the middle that allows it to rotate and then bears all that force. The more off balance this is, the more it vibrates that and wears it out over time. But again, for most homeowners, you're not going to be really using it often enough for that to be a long-term issue. Some exceptions obviously to that, but in general, I've never seen somebody personally wear out a bearing on a lawnmower. That is a lot of abuse, and I mean a lot, but let's get another couple passes in.
Now with my final passes, I'm removing one low spot that I left from earlier, and then I'm focusing on that farther out edge. And like I said before, that'll more heavily impact the center of gravity because it's farther from your center point. So removing the same amount of material farther off the center is going to have a bigger effect on the balance. And it might not look it on the camera, but the balance came out nearly perfect after those few passes. Let's take a closer look real quick, then this should be ready to reinstall.
It might not look it on camera because my tripod's not perfectly level here, but this is pretty good. So now we're ready to put this back on, and before we do, let's clean out the bottom of our lawnmower.
Before I begin cleaning, I'm doing a final little touch-up pass using a whetstone on the edge of this blade. It's the same concept where you're maintaining that angle along the entire edge of the blade, but this just cleans up the little tiny burrs and variations. And it's the same thing you see chefs doing with that metal stick when they're sharpening their knives. It's called honing. I'm probably saying it wrong. It's spelled like this, but really it's going to give you a more consistent and therefore a more effective cutting edge on the end of the blade. With that done, we go back over to our lawnmower. I've still got it propped up, and I'm just using an old beat-up putty knife to try to scrape all the dried grass, dirt, and gunk out of the bottom of this. Now this will get all over the surface below it, so if you're worried about your driveway being messy, I suggest doing this off to the side. For whatever reason, I just wasn't thinking ahead when I was filming this video, so I did make a mess in my driveway that I had to clean up afterwards. Keep in mind that this is still the bottom of a lawnmower. It doesn't need to be absolutely showroom quality. It is going to get dirty and used again. I'm just trying to remove the vast majority of the debris so that nothing else flies up and hits hits the blade and dulls it faster. That said, feel free to do as much or as little cleaning of the bottom side as you want for this reason. Once you're happy with how much you've cleaned it out, you are ready to reinstall your mower blade. Now obviously be a little more careful handling it now because the blade is freshly sharpened, but all you're doing is lining it up the same way that it was installed before when you initially took it off. That means the blade has to be facing the same side, and if you have more than one bolt hole in it, obviously you want both of those in place and not just one. Once everything's nice and lined up, you're just going to bolt it back into place, then lower it back down to your driveway. And like I said before, if you did this over your driveway and you weren't planning ahead like me, now's a good time to clean that up as well. That said, your mower should now be ready for use.
And there you have it. That is how you sharpen a lawnmower blade. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.